Well, joining us now to talk more about this carnage, North Carolina Senator Richard Burr, who is chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator, thank you for joining us. I have to ask this question. How do we win the war on terror when we have the FBI admitting that they interviewed this guy twice? I mean, astoundingly, possible ties to an American suicide bomber. He made inflammatory comments to coworkers. He running around the security firm, talking about ISIS. It sounds like exactly like what happened with the Odor Sinarov brother in Boston, Tamerlan. What potentially went wrong? How do we correct this? And what should we do?
Well, Eric, I would tell you the first thing we need to do is realize that we're in a war in the United States and around the world. We're in a war against terrorism. And the threshold for trying to identify an individual that might be a member or an arm of a terrorist organization is tough. The FBI has interviewed a heck of a lot of people in the last few years. As a matter of fact, the FBI has arrested and prosecuted over 101 individuals in the United States alone since January of last year who were committed to carry out a terrorist act here in the country. Their track record's pretty good. But as the agent said at the press conference, they went through, they did all the background check, they talked to the individuals that reported this shooter. They interviewed him on numerous occasions, but they didn't find that link that's needed to raise the level of concern for him or to increase surveillance.
Being mindful, Senator, of our civil liberties, finding that link. What if there is no link? What if there are other factors? It's a free country, but mindful of these liberties. Should we have something else? What if he's on Facebook? What if he has some emails? What if he expresses these sympathies? Should something more potentially be done with our country's laws to get a better handle on this?
Well, I'll leave the investigation up to the FBI and to local law enforcement. But from an intelligence standpoint, I can assure every American that we've got law enforcement and agencies every day combing social media trying to look for the comments that are said that raise our concerns about an individual or about a group or about a location. That continues day in and day out 24/7. But from a standpoint of an individual who might have been either directed or inspired in the last week, went out and legally bought firearms and committed a horrific act, Eric, quite honestly, this is what many of us on the intelligence community have been saying for the last year, if not longer. We've got to take this much more seriously. We've got to eliminate the desire that terrorists have to commit acts in this country. We've got to make sure that we go where they plan and where they start these communications. Because if you look at our track record, we've taken tools away from law enforcement in the last 12 months, not giving them more to try to prevent these acts.
So what tools do you want law enforcement to resume?
Well, listen, we're at a point now that technology allows communications to happen where we can't see inside of them. It's called encryption. And there is a privacy issue at debate right now in this country. But for the FBI to really know what's out there, if they've got probable cause, they ought to have the ability to look inside that communication. We'll know much more in the next 48 hours as the FBI looks through the electronics, the media of this shooter. We'll know whether there were connections. We'll know whether there was encrypted communications. And that may lead us as to what the next debate we might have in Washington about tools that law enforcement needs to prevent these acts in the future.
And it is so frightening, Senator, and actually chilling when you have someone like this man who works at a security firm, had gun licenses. Apparently the firm actually does security for federal buildings, and he has access to these guns. At the same time, he's got the co-workers complaining about him. It's just like Saeed Farouk out in San Bernardino, who had these expressions, but nothing ever came of it. So when you talk about the encryption, talk about the communications, it is hard. And it is difficult, no matter how hard the federal authorities investigate someone, to leap to that next leap, actually to see if there is, as you say, probable cause that their talking will result in this carnage and travesty that we've seen.
And Eric, let me assure you, I'm sure the Bureau has gone back in the last 8 hours and looked at the interviews that agents carried out with this shooter to see if they missed something then. But the American people have to know the FBI has done a miraculous job at preventing terrorist acts in this country. They continue to get better, but terrorists throw more and more at us, and eventually something's going to sneak by. This was a horrific act. My heart goes out to all the families that are going to be affected. But America needs to understand we need to take this much more seriously than we do today, and we need policies that embrace that.
And in terms, finally, Senator, of radical Islamic terrorism, look, 25 years. First killing was 1990 here in New York City. El Sayed Nosair worked at the court buildings. All the judges knew him, shot Meyer Kahana to death. And just 2 months ago in Orlando and Sanford, there was an imam who was there who's known for preaching for death to homosexuals, saying that's allowed by Sharia law. I mean, that's right out there in the open. We don't know if that inspired this horrible act. But finally, when you've got this cauldron going on, what would you say to the moderate Muslims? What would you say to that community when these people are there, when they're out there and time and time again, whether it's San Bernardino, Little Rock, Fort Hood, we have these horrific situations, and it just sadly continues.
Well, I'd say to Muslims what I'd say to the rest of America and the rest of the world. When you see something out of place, when you're concerned about an individual, you need to report it. The reality is that as we look around the globe today, the intent by terrorists and the capability of terrorists exist because they go unchecked in geographical areas that allow them to plan and communicate. And I think it's safe to say there are a lot of sympathizers around the world, probably more than we'll ever have an opportunity to identify. But that's our goal, is to make sure that we allow free speech, we allow the protection of privacy, but law enforcement takes their mission very seriously to keep America safe.
And we certainly thank the FBI for its diligence. The facts will come out, as you say, Senator, about what happened here. And we thank Mateen's co-workers who were so alarmed a couple of years ago about what he was saying apparently at the office that they did pick up the phone and report him. Senator Richard Burr, Chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, thank you for joining us on this sad and sorrowful Sunday afternoon.